Hello, this is the next instalment of John Masefield's The Box of Delights. We're now up to chapter 8. While he was looking through the letters next morning, Ellen brought him the papers. "Oh, Master K," she said, "have you heard the news? The Bishop of Chichester has disappeared." "What?" Kay said. "Papers are full of it," Ellen said. "The reverend gentleman went out of the palace last night for a brisk walk before going to bed according to his custom, and he hasn't come back." Kay opened the paper. "Startling disappearance of the Bishop of Chichester. Considerable alarm was caused in ecclesiastical circles last night when it was known that His Grace the Bishop of Chichester had failed to return to the palace and was not heard of at the time of our going to press. The very reverend gentleman had passed the evening at the palace in making ready for the Christmas season, and in dispatching his Christmas cards to the clergy of his diocese, a duty that his Grace leaves to no hands but his own. On conclusion of this pleasant duty, his Grace signified to his sister, Dame Eleanor Chasuble, that he would go for a brisk walk through the precincts before retiring to rest. According to her nightly custom, Dame Chasuble prepared tea for his Grace on his return. At midnight, when he had not returned, she became alarmed and telephoned to the Dean, who inquired at once of the hospital if his Grace had been the victim of an accident. But, receiving a negative response, they communicated with the police, and although an active search was at once instituted, we regret to announce that no news has been received of his Grace's whereabouts. It will be remembered that the palace was the scene of a serious burglary the night before last, and it is thought that the bishop's disappearance may be connected with the earlier outrage. We are sure that we voice the feelings of thousands of our readers when we extend to Dame Chasuble our heartiest sympathy in her anxiety and liveliest hopes that his Grace may soon be restored to the bosom of his household and his diocese." "I say," Kay said to himself, "now they've got the bishop. It's the same gang after this box of delights, and they think the bishop's got it." While he was meditating this in the dining room, Peter came down. "You look pretty gloomy, Kay," Peter said. "I am pretty gloomy," Kay said. "They've scrubbled the bishop." "And who do you think they are?" Peter said. "I know you think it's absurd, Peter, but I think they're the missionary college people out at Chester Hills. Would you come with me to see what kind of place it is?" "I don't mind," Peter said. "Shall we go after breakfast?" "I was thinking we might get there and back before breakfast," Kay said, leading the way to the door. "How on earth would we get about 40 miles and back?" Peter said. Kay caught hold of his arm and with his other hand twitched the button on the magic box. Instantly both of them were plucked through the air so swiftly that they saw the fields and brooks in a kind of blur beneath them. Then suddenly they were whirled downwards, and there they were on a hillside, standing on what was the rampart of an old camp, both a little out of breath. "Now, this is Chester Hills," Kay said, "and that's Hope under Chester's, where the curates got in, who I believe picked my pocket. You can see this was once a Roman camp too." "Where do you want to go now?" Peter said. "I think down there into that valley," Kay said. Looking down on the valley, the boys saw nothing but a great woodland which began a little way below the camp and filled all the valley. But there were folds in it. And what there was in the folds they could not see. "You can see from the lie of the land," said Kay, "that a road ran out of this gateway down the hill. I'll bet if you had a spade to clear away the turf, you'd come upon a Roman pavement underneath." He led the way down the hill, and presently the lines of the Roman track became more difficult to follow. When they came to the edge of the wood, the track was barred by a locked and chained gate. There was a notice nailed to a tree. "Trespassers will be prosecuted." And on another tree there was a bigger notice. "Danger! Man-traps and spring guns." The track inside the wood was hardly more than a woodland path. The wood, which contained a great deal of yew and other dark evergreens, looked curiously forbidding and evil, and in the darkness and wetness, with its profuse mass of close sinister growth, it put a chill on both boys' hearts. "It doesn't look a very cheery place," Peter said. "I don't think we ought to risk those notices." "Oh, rats," Kay said. "I don't believe in any of those notices. For years I was scared of a notice that said bloodhounds, and there wasn't a bloodhound in the county. Come along, in, but we'd better not talk much and we won't make more noise than we must." He clambered over the gate and Peter followed him along the woodland track, which led downhill. As it bent and twisted, Kay went forward boldly, but Peter went with a beating heart. "I say, Kay," Peter said, "I wish you wouldn't hurry on like this. You ought to go cautiously." "It's absolutely safe," Kay said. "Do look, nobody's been on this woodland track for weeks." "But a keeper might come at any minute," Peter said. "There aren't keepers," Kay said. "You can see that this place isn't preserved, or we'd have seen pheasants long ago, or keepers, vermin boards, or dead stoats and weasels and poor beautiful owls." Presently they passed from the woodland to a rather denser part that was more like a neglected shrubbery with azaleas and rhododendrons, all straggled and overgrown. Between lines of box trees, however, a path that seemed to be in considerable use led to right and left through the gaps in the dense shrubbery. The boys saw the gleam of water just below them. "Let's go down and have a look at the water," said Kay. They left the path and thrust through the shrubbery where it seemed thinnest until they were just inside a rhododendron bush on the very lip of the water which stretched before them in a very long and beautiful lake. It was not much more than 100 yards across, but it gave Kay the illusion of great depth and of being very evil, dark as it was, fringed on both sides by beautiful trees, nearly all dark. "I say," Kay said, "what a place!" "It gives me the fantods," Peter answered. "I don't like this place." "Well, we've come here now," Kay said. "Do let's examine it before we go." Away to the left the lake came to an end in some tumbled rocks and boulders, beyond which the ground rose, with shrubberies and ornamental trees, and beyond the trees buildings seemingly of great extent. They were yellowish, Kay thought, as though built of Cotswold stone, and from somewhere within their mass a little bell chimed gracefully for the half hour. "Now I'm going along here to look at the house," Kay said. "You coming?" "No, I don't think I will, thanks," Peter said. "You go and have a look at the house if you like. I'll just go along and look at the boathouse and see if one could come here in the summer for a swim." "Well, do look out for yourself," Kay said. "That little clock just chimed for 8:30. When it chimes for 9, you be inside the track we came by. You can easily take cover and wait for me." He went off along the path between the box trees, and he hadn't gone very far before he heard footsteps and voices coming towards him. One was the unmistakable high voice of the foxy-faced man, saying, "So, you'll be getting them all in the soup. What?" Something followed which Kay could not quite catch, but the next voice was undoubtedly that of Abner. "As to that matter, sir," Abner was saying in his silky soft voice, "that's a question that must wait until we've had our bathe and our breakfast. Perhaps they will be in a better mood and be more disposed to be reasonable after their good night's rest." The men passed where Kay was hidden without seeing him. The foxy-faced man said, "It will be mighty cold. One plunge, and then will be enough for me." "It will be exhilarating," Abner said. Kay heard feet running upon springboards and 2 splashes, followed by splutterings. The foxy-faced man was saying, "It's like iced water, what?" Kay heard them crawling up the steps from the water, and Abner saying, "Enough for honour. We will leave the rest to the British." He heard them rubbing themselves down and muttering with clacking teeth that their blood would never run warm again. Soon they had their robes round them and were running back along the path by which they had come. Kay went out from his hiding place and crept along in the direction in which they had gone. Presently he came to the end of the lake among the tumbled rocks and boulders. At first he could see no outlet to the water, but then he heard, among the sign of the pine trees, a sort of wash of water. The path by which the bathers had come led above the tumble of rocks. He followed it through a dense shrubbery and presently came into a thicket of laurel bordering on a drive. Through the laurel he could see a spacious mansion built in Cotswold stone, somewhere early in the reign of George III, on a foundation much older. He was looking directly across at great double front doors within a portico. They were lofty doors, paned with glass to give it light to the hall within, and while he watched there came from within the house the sweet banging of a gong. Almost immediately 6 men wearing black cloaks came out of the outhouses to the right of the house and passed through the front doors. Just as the last of them had passed under the portico, there came a loud hissing noise, something between a whistle and an escape of steam from somewhere up in the air. A laurel was rather in the way, but Kay saw the men in black look up towards the noise and looked up himself. To his amazement, he saw a silvery aeroplane poised just like a kestrel above the house, hovering in a way that Kate hadn't thought possible. And the whistle or hiss of steam was plainly a signal for a moment later the aeroplane sank slowly down vertically, as though into the very body of the house. "Whoever would have thought an aeroplane could do that?" thought Kay. "I suppose that's the kind of aeroplane that scrobbled Maria. Now, I wonder if poor old Co Hawlings and the Bishop and perhaps Caroline Louisa are shut up in dungeons only a few yards away." However, it was now time to start back towards Peter. As he crossed above the tumbled rocks, he looked again, hoping to see some opening among them. This time he saw what he ought to have noticed before, a sluice with its winch, besides which was a rusty iron grating, so covered with a drift of different sorts that it could not easily be distinguished. At this moment the bell above the missionary college struck 9 and chimed the hour. Kay hurried to the place where Peter was to be, but Peter was not there. "Oh, where has he gone?" he thought. "What should I have done in it if I had been in Peter's place?" He followed along the path by which he thought Peter might have gone on an exploration. A little brook ran across the path, and in the mud by the brook's bank was the mark of Peter's shoes. Presently the ground began to be very soft, with a good many springs breaking out. Here Peter's tracks were plain indeed. On the far side of the soft patch, the track turned a corner, and there, to Kay's horror, were other tracks. 2 or 3 men had been there, and there were little fresh, unmistakable signs of rapid trampling and scuffling. "There's no doubt about it," Kay thought. "They've scrobbled Peter." He reckoned up the chances and decided that it would be safe to follow after these people, whoever they were, but he had not gone far before he heard the noise of oars on the lake. Peering through the branches he saw, pulling towards the mansion on the far side, a boat in whose stern sheets lay something that looked like a roll of blanket. "That's Peter scrobbled," Kay thought. "I'll get back home and speak to the inspector, and perhaps by that time there will be a word from Caroline Louisa." He took up his box of delights and pressed the knob. A sort of whirlwind plucked him up between the treetops and snatched him to the box-tree walks at Seekings, where he was set gently upon his feet. He found the other children at breakfast. "You're very late, Kay," Maria said. "Have you seen the latest? Here." She unfolded the paper for him. "Mysterious disappearance of the Mary Dean. Ecclesiastical and other circles have been convulsed at Tatchester by the strange disappearance of the well-known Dean from the precincts. It appears that the Dean went out shortly after dark last night in response to what was said to have been an urgent summons, and has not yet been heard of. It is feared at the deanery that he has been the victim of a motor car accident, but we are entitled to our own conviction that the disappearance of the reverend gentleman coming so soon after the burglary at the palace and the disappearance of His Grace the Bishop are crimes perpetrated by some local gang. Something like a reign of terror exists at this moment throughout Tatchester. It is hardly necessary to remind our readers that the Dean of Tatchester is the well-known author of Possible Oriental Influences in Ancient Philosophies, as well as the famous handbook Cheerfulness, the Christian Duty. Now, what do you think of that? Maria said. That's a gang that scrobbled me. I believe they scrobbled Peter too, Kay said. and as soon as I've had some breakfast I'll go round to the police station." "I love to see sleuths at work," Maria said, "so I'll come too." They went round and the inspector welcomed them. "Come in, Miss Maria and Master Kay," he said. "What is it now? More clues for the law to follow?" Kay told his story and all his suspicions. "Ah," the inspector said, "and footprints in the mud, you say, and the roll of blanket in the boat. But you're quite wrong, Master Kay, in saying that the principal of the training college is a Mr. Brown. It's Father Bottledale, as I told you. I'll telephone him now." He telephoned. "Is that you, your reverence?" he asked. "I'm the Inspector of Police speaking. I want to ask you if you have seen anything of a lad aged 10 by the name of Peter, who was out at your place this morning. You haven't seen him? Hasn't been seen at all? Thank you. And have you with you a gentleman by the name of Abner Brown? No? Well, you will forgive my disturbing you at your good work. Thank you, sir, and I wish the same to you." "You see, Master Kay," he said, hanging up the telephone, "they know nothing of Master Peter there, but it's my belief about boys that leave 'em alone and they'll come home." Kay thanked him and they returned home. "Pompous old ass," Maria said. "He's a jolly good chap, really," Kay said. "He mayn't be quite a Sherlock Holmes, but he's most awfully good about rabbits." As they went into the little street, more newsboys came rushing from the station outside, shouting, "Special edition of the Chichester Times! Another disappearance special! Cannons at Chichester disappear special!" Kay bought a paper for which the boy charged him 6pence. He read the little sheet, which was still wet from the press. "We feel that this morning's events are so extraordinary that we are warranted in making them the subject of a special edition of our paper. The night before last, our deservedly popular prelate was torn from us. Last night, the world's dean, as we may call him, similarly disappeared. Early this morning, while they were walking back from the early morning service, Canon Honeytongue and Canon Balmblossom, his friend, were met by a messenger who told them that the dean had met with a motor accident and was suffering from a slight concussion and was asking eagerly to see them. The reverend gentleman then hurried to the waiting car and on asking the driver how long they would be, were told less than an hour. They called to their friends, others of the cathedral clergy who were accompanying them through the close, that they would be back to breakfast. The anxiety of the people of Chichester may be judged when the breakfast hour passed without any message whatsoever from the missing canons. We ask all the inhabitants of the diocese to come forward at once in aiding the police by reporting the movements of all cars likely to have been concerned in the removal of the reverend gentleman. The car is reported to have been large black, dark blue, dark brown, or even dark grey, green or grey saloon, with a clean-shaven driver in a dark suit. Anyone who may have seen such a car in any of the country roads in the hours between 5 and 7:30 this morning is asked to telephone at once to the Chief of Chichester Constabulary. Telephone number Chichester 7000. In the meantime, we convey to all the members of the cathedral establishment our heartfelt sympathy with their anxiety. Now, what do you think of that? Maria said. Wait a moment, Kay said. There's some stop press news here at the side. Stop press news? The rumour current that the missing prelate was seen near Chester Hills last night turns out to be without foundation. The gentleman mistaken for the bishop was the Reverend Father Bottledale of the Ecclesiastical Training College, who has long been known as the bishop's double. No reliable information has reached the authority about any of the missing dignitaries. I know what I think of it, Kay said. They've got the bishop, the dean, the punch and duty man, the 2 canons and Peter in that den of theirs at Chester Hills. If I were you, I'd telephone the yard, Maria said. It's no good going to your champion rabbit man or whatever he is. Go to the sleuths whose job it is to sleuth. They telephoned the yard, who referred them to the chief of the Chichester Constabulary. Telephone number, Tatchester 7000. When they rang the number, they were told that the matter would meet with every attention, and although no news had come about any of the missing gentlemen, they expected developments before the evening. At lunchtime, Kay was called to the telephone. Caroline Louisa's sister wanted to speak about her brother, who was now better. Kay explained that Caroline Louisa had not returned from London and had left no word.
"Well,"
the sister said,
"she set off from here 2 days ago. Whatever could have happened?"
Kay had a shrewd suspicion that what had happened and went back to lunch feeling very miserable. After lunch it came on to rain. There was still no news of Peter, and it wasn't possible to play in the garden. He went upstairs to his room, locked the doors, covered the keyholes as before, ducked under the valance of the dressing table, and looked again into the box of delights. This time he looked into an entirely different scene. There was a little hill with a beech clump upon it, and a vixen playing with her cubs on some tumbled chalk outside a barrow. A badger was padding about. From the glow upon the wood it seemed to Kay to be about sunset on a fine May evening. But presently he was aware that some of the glow upon the trees was due to the presence of multitudes of butterflies, painted ladies, red admirals, peacocks, purple emperors, chalk blues, commas, tortoise-shells, purple and green hair-streaks, and others, Camberwell beauties and swallowtails, and all these began moving suddenly towards him. He noticed that they were drawing an airy chariot that was made out of rose leaves from some sweetbriar rose. Although it looked very fragile, Kay stepped into the chariot, and at once the butterflies lifted him up high over the treetops, going much more swiftly than he would have thought possible, and although their flight wavered now up, now down, it was extraordinarily delightful. Soon they were flying over the very woods from which Peter had disappeared. But inside the wood and all around the great house, as Kay drew near it, there were wolves, running, snarling, with their hackles up and teeth gleaming. He had never thought it possible that there could be so many. Then, at one little window, as Kay floated past, he saw Caroline Louisa stretching out her hands to him, calling, "Help me, Kay!" Instantly, 2 great she-wolves dragged her from the window and pulled down an iron shutter. The butterflies changed their direction and flew away, and away from Chester Hills, and at last brought Kay to a bare mountain which he had never before seen. In the mountainside there was a little door with a knocker. Kay knocked at the knocker, and a little old man opened the door and said, "Will you please walk in, Master Kay? And what would you like to see, the treasures or the work?" "I should like to see both, please," Kay said. The little old man opened a door, and there was a furnace with bellows and an anvil, with other little men hard at work, making extraordinary things out of metals and precious stones. Kay was so delighted that he stared and stared, and at last one of them plucked a piece of gold, beat it rapidly into the shape of a little rosebud, and thrust it into Kay's buttonhole. Then the little old man said that it would be time for him to be going, and led him to the stone door on the hillside, where there was a sort of boat harnessed to wild duck. When he got into the boat, the wild duck flew with it high into the air over the dark woods, and then down and down and down, till at last he was just over Seeking's house, and had only to drop down the chimney, as it seemed, into his room. Just as he snapped the box to in his pocket, there came a clattering at the door. "Kay, Kay!" Maria cried. "What is it?" Kay said. "What isn't it?" she said. "They've got the whole of the cathedral staff." In the study she showed him a paper. There was a single sheet still damp from the press, the big black headings easily smudged. "Unparalleled atrocity, reign of terror in Cathedral City." And there was a note. "We had thought that the mystery attached to the disappearance of the eminent clergy of the Tatchester establishment would by this time have been cleared up. We regret to say that our confidence was gravely misplaced. Tonight we have to report the complete disappearance of the precentor, the vestryman, the bursar, the canons minor, the archdeacon, vergers, organist, and it is feared other members of the cathedral staff. Anyone able to throw the slightest light on this very dark mystery are adjured to communicate at once with the local police, telephone Tatchester 7000, and to spare no pains in bringing the offenders to justice." "We've been wondering where on earth you've been," Maria said. "Oh," Kay said, I suppose I fell asleep." What a very pretty shiny buttonhole you've got, Maria said. What is it? It's just a little rose, Kay said, looking down, and indeed there in his buttonhole was the golden rose that had been made for him in the mountain. They waited up until the news on the wireless, and heard that the archbishops were determined that in case of need the services should be held in the cathedral in spite of the absence of the regular staff, and that certain clergy had been asked to proceed to Tatchester to officiate there if the need arose. The announcer said that the matter was viewed with the greatest seriousness, and that the public was asked to cooperate with the police by giving instant, accurate information of a red, white, blue, green, grey, brown or black motor bus. The colours had been variously given by various observers. Proceeding at a frightening pace in the direction of Tatchester some 20 minutes ago, before the alleged outrage. I say, Kay said, there will be a fine old twitter in Tatchester. Well, Maria said, if they survive, they'll have something to talk of as long as they live. Next to being martyred, I should think that being scrobbled would be the greatest joy a clergyman could have. I should prefer it to being martyred myself, but taste differ. With that, she went to put some holly in Jemima's bed and then retired to rest. End of chapter 8.